Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant before her son was born. Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his 4th. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity and deceit, returned home after giving her statement. Despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled 2 relationships, maintaining 2 homes and nearly entering into 2 marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal, and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who were raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. Nanette Krentle grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentle while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, She sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentle's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. A young woman returned home after a night of celebration. By dawn, that same house had transformed into the scene of a chilling discovery: a splintered door, a lifeless body, and a silence that concealed unspeakable violence. What unfolded within those walls in the early hours of August 16, 2024, would soon be remembered as one of the most harrowing crimes in recent years in Jokotanango. Andrea Sanchez, was born on September 23, 1998, in Guatemala City. She was the youngest of several sisters. Their life unfolded quietly, like so many other ordinary families. As Andrea reached adulthood, she decided to leave the bustle of the city and move to Jocotenango, a small town in the department of Zacatepec, about 25 kilometers from her birthplace. Life there was slower, surrounded by the colonial beauty of nearby Antigua. For Andrea, it was a place where she could live more peacefully. Blending into the rhythm of the community, faith was at the heart of her world. Andrea became an active member of the Hermandad Esquipulas de Antigua, Guatemala, one of the country's most respected religious brotherhoods. She took part in many church activities, especially during Holy Week processions, where her devotion and discipline were clearly seen. Those who knew her remembered her as spiritual, quiet, and humble. A young woman whose life was shaped by faith and service. It was within this environment that Andrea met Carlos Monzon. He too was active in the Brotherhood, often helping during liturgical events and assisting wherever needed. His devotion earned him respect among fellow members. At first, he appeared to be a man of strong character, steady faith. What started as a simple connection through shared religious commitments gradually grew into something deeper. Their friendship strengthened, and over time, it blossomed into a romantic relationship. Before long, whispers began spreading in their circle. It was clear Andrea and Carlos were more than just acquaintances. To outsiders, they seemed like the perfect couple. Social media only reinforced this impression. Photos filled with smiles, affectionate captions, and gestures of tenderness that painted the image of a flawless love story. Their relationship appeared solid, even enviable. But behind those carefully chosen images, the truth was far more complicated. According to friends and relatives, Carlos was not the calm, steady man he pretended to be. He was jealous, controlling, and increasingly possessive. Andrea began to show signs of feeling trapped in an unhealthy relationship. The tenderness displayed in public often gave way to tension and fear in private. Close friends later recalled that Andrea sometimes confided in them about her worries. She admitted that Carlos frightened her, especially when he drank. His moods could change suddenly, turning aggressive, even threatening. While not every outburst turned physical, his words and tone carried a weight that left Andrea shaken and deeply unsettled. This fragile balance carried on until the night of August 15, 2024. At around 11:30 p.m., Andrea and Carlos joined thousands of others at one of Guatemala's most iconic celebrations, the Feria de Jocotenango. This traditional festival, held annually in honor of the Virgin of the Assumption, fills the town with music, food, and joy. It is one of the most beloved events of the year, drawing people from far and wide. For Andrea and Carlos, that night's fair was just like another ordinary celebration, but in reality, it marked the beginning of a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Amid the music, food stalls, bright decorations, and festive atmosphere of the Feria de Jocotenango, Andrea and Carlos blended in perfectly with the lively crowd. They laughed together, mingled with friends, posed for photos, and shared drinks, giving every impression of being just happy couple enjoying one of Guatemala's most iconic celebrations. To those around them, they looked carefree and in love. The outing lasted until late at night and early in the morning. Friends later recalled Andrea appearing in high spirits when she headed home to Jocotenango. She seemed content, smiling and cheerful after an evening surrounded by celebration. But as dawn began to break, the atmosphere in her home shifted into something far more sinister. According to later accounts, Carlos entered Andrea's house in the early morning and discovered her lifeless. What followed raised immediate suspicions. Instead of calling emergency services right away, his first instinct was to phone a friend. His voice was described as nervous and unsteady, though not completely broken, as he claimed Andrea had died without giving clear details about how or why. Only afterward did he contact the emergency services. Emergency responders arrived to what seemed like a peaceful scene. Andrea's body was on the living room couch. She had no obvious injuries. No blood was visible, and the furniture was undisturbed, suggesting no struggle had occurred. Initially, it appeared she had simply died quietly in her sleep. But investigators quickly noticed troubling inconsistencies. The bedroom door had clear signs of damage, the wooden frame was splintered, and the lock appeared forced, suggesting someone had broken in or attempted to. This detail stood in sharp contrast to the otherwise peaceful appearance of the room and immediately raised questions about what had really happened during those final hours. By August 16, 2024, word of Andrea's death spread quickly through Jocatanango and surrounding communities. Neighbors were left shocked and unsettled. Andrea was remembered as a gentle, devout young woman, known for her involvement in her religious brotherhood and her respectful demeanor. The mysterious circumstances of her death created unease and confusion. At first, there was no official cause of death, and early reports offered more speculation than clarity. The lack of obvious violence made the case even more puzzling, as if crucial pieces of the story were still missing. Authorities knew from the start that this would require a meticulous and thorough investigation. One of the first major leads came not from the crime scene itself, but from social media. A photograph Andrea had posted just hours earlier at the fair, smiling alongside Carlos, illuminated by the colorful lights of the celebration, became a key piece of evidence. The photo's digital timestamp and metadata confirmed the exact time it was taken, and friends' accounts supported the timeline. It also firmly established Carlos as the last known person to have been with Andrea while she was still alive. A photo capturing a fun evening accidentally became a keepsake of her final moments. Investigators began to reconstruct Andrea's last night. Step by step, security cameras in Jocatanango provided critical footage that contradicted Carlos's version of events. At 2:44 a.m., cameras captured Andrea and Carlos walking together toward her house. By 4 a.m., Carlos was seen leaving alone. Just 20 minutes later, he returned briefly, only to leave again at 4:54 a.m. on a motorcycle. Most notably, at 6:47 a.m., cameras showed him re-entering Andrea's home, this time wearing different clothes. Shortly afterward, he made the emergency call, reporting her death. The timeline suggested that Andrea was attacked between 2:44 a.m. and 4 a.m. Shortly after arriving home, forensic analysis indicated that her body had been moved from the bedroom to the couch, likely in an attempt to stage the scene and downplay signs of violence. The damaged doorframe, combined with the suspicious sequence of Carlos's movements, made investigators increasingly confident that this was no accident or break-in, but an intentional act carried out. For investigators, the reconstructed timeline left little doubt. Sometime between 2:44 a.m. and 4 a.m., Carlos had attacked Andrea inside her home. Evidence indicated that he used force to silence her, likely covering her mouth and nose with an object until she could no longer breathe. In what seemed like an attempt to divert suspicion, he staged the scene. Andrea's body had been moved and placed on the living room couch to create the impression she had died peacefully. Her bedroom door was deliberately damaged from the outside, as if someone had broken in. The setup was designed to suggest a burglary gone wrong, but the inconsistencies were obvious. Nothing was stolen. There was no mess, or overturned furniture, and Andrea's body showed no signs of abuse. Instead, the details pointed to a calculated and personal act, violence disguised as chance. The investigation took a decisive turn with the forensic report from the Instituto Nacional de Ciencias Forenses. The findings were clear. Andrea had died of asphyxia due to suffocation, but before that, she had suffered blunt force trauma to her head and neck. The cranioencephalic injuries matched a direct assault and were incompatible with an accident. With this report, the version presented by Carlos collapsed. As word of the case spread, the story quickly moved beyond Jocotenango and reached national headlines. Media outlets reported every new detail: the betrayal, the staged crime scene, the fate of a young woman known for her quiet faith. Andrea's death was no longer just a neighborhood mystery. It had become a symbol of outrage across Guatemala. Social media exploded with disbelief and anger. People, friends, neighbors, and even strangers shared their grief and support. The incident was quickly recognized as femicide, not just a random tragedy. The public was outraged and demanded justice immediately. On September 26, 2024, just over a month after Andrea's death, authorities acted. Carlos was arrested during a judicial operation that included a search of Andrea's home, where investigators collected key evidence that would strengthen the case. Combined with the contradictions in Carlos's testimony and the forensic findings, the picture became clear. Prosecutors advanced a straightforward hypothesis: jealousy was the motive. Testimonies from friends and family confirmed this standing suspicions. Carlos had a controlling personality and often showed aggression, particularly when drinking. Their relationship, once thought to be tender and devout, was now revealed as one overshadowed by fear and domination. The judicial process moved swiftly. On October 3rd, the initial hearing took place. The prosecution presented the sequence of events, forensic analysis, and increasing evidence implicating Carlos in Andrea's death. When questioned, Carlos provided his account of his actions that night and the following morning. However, he never admitted guilt. His testimony contained numerous inconsistencies and evasive answers. He tried to explain why he was at and returned to Andrea's home, but avoided directly answering key questions. This lack of clarity strengthened the suspicions against him. At the hearing's conclusion, the court formally charged Carlos with femicide and ordered him to be held in custody pending trial. In the courtroom, Andrea's sisters endured hours of agonizing testimony and evidence. They were heartbroken, confronting the man accused of murdering their youngest sister. Their grief was immense, mixed with fierce anger. During the hearing, one sister revealed a shocking detail. Carlos, the killer, had not only attended Andrea's funeral, but had also helped carry her coffin. He calmly bore the weight of the casket during the burial, walking alongside grieving family members to the cemetery. They viewed it as a sickening act of hypocrisy, a performance to deceive others, avoid suspicion, or perhaps a misguided attempt to deal with his guilt. For Andrea's family, the memory of that moment was agonizing, a stark reminder of the deceit and betrayal surrounding her death. The family's only goal was to get justice for Andrea. During Carlos's trial, the prosecution presented a strong case. They had a lot of evidence, including forensic reports, security camera video, and witness statements. All the evidence showed the same thing. Andrea's death was not an accident. She was killed on purpose. The prosecution requested the maximum sentence of 50 years imprisonment, as permitted by Guatemalan law. They asserted that Carlos planned and executed the crime with extreme violence and continues to pose a threat. The defense lawyer tried to raise reasonable doubt by suggesting a different cause of death for Andrea. Their forensic consultant claimed Andrea might have died from a typical health issue. However, the consultant's claim did not hold up under scrutiny, given the strong evidence against it. The judge found the official forensic report and the timeline established by security footage to be the most convincing evidence. On April 11, 2025, the court found Carlos Monzon guilty of femicide and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. He will not be eligible for parole, bail, or a reduced sentence. Although Andrea's family had wanted a harsher penalty, they felt the verdict was a significant step towards justice. Before being taken into custody, Carlos briefly stated that he was still seeking justice and demanded his release. However, his words seemed insincere. Given the overwhelming evidence against him, the sentence brought a mix of emotions to Andrea's family, relief that Carlos was convicted and could not hurt others, but also disappointment that he did not receive the maximum punishment. The conviction, however, served as a tribute to Andrea's memory. Andrea Sanchez, Andrea's sister, publicly thanked the investigators, the courts, and the media for keeping Andrea's story in the public eye. She recognized that public pressure helped prevent the case from being forgotten. Andrea had trusted someone who professed to love her, but he betrayed her in the worst possible way. Because of her family's persistence, strong evidence, and the public's call for justice, her case was not ignored. However, a troubling question remains. How many more women must die before society stops accepting violence that is disguised as love? On a quiet afternoon in January, the small town in Waller County, Texas, was suddenly shaken by a scene so horrifying that even the most seasoned police officers shuddered. In a guest house located on a large plot of land owned by a wealthy family, blood was splattered on the floor, covering the walls and ceiling. In the middle of the room, the body of a young woman lay motionless, her head severed, a bloody knife thrown next to her. It was Angi, just 21 years old, an immigrant from Nicaragua with dreams of building a bright future in America. The person standing in that room, eerily calm, was her husband, Jared Dykus, 23 years old, the only son of a prestigious family in the area. How did a love story once considered the American dream turn into a terrible tragedy? Why would a young man born into wealth, raised in a powerful family, commit such a barbaric crime? This is not just a murder, but a bloody warning about the control and violence hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect marriage. And to understand how things spiraled into tragedy, we have to go back to the beginning, where two seemingly opposite people collided. Jared Dykus was born and raised in Waller County, Texas, just over an hour's drive from Houston. His family was famous and wealthy in the area, owning a lot of real estate and land. They lived in a large house, prominent amidst the vast farms. Previously, the family had a large house and a smaller guest house, but as he grew up, the guest house was converted into his own private residence. Jared chose to live there, realizing the dream of many young Americans by not having to rent a house. He and his young wife, Angi, have lived here together. Angi was born in Nicaragua in 2001. When she grew up, she immigrated to the United States in search of a better life. Unlike Jared, her career path was initially difficult. Angi was born into a poor family. From a young age, she witnessed financial hardship. This made her hardworking and always helping her family. She is also a calm and friendly person. When she came to America, she kept a calm attitude, liked to work to support herself and help her family. Angi dreamed of building a good future. She wanted to marry an American, to settle down and receive support. With her charming appearance and sweet personality, she attracted Jared from the first meeting. At that time, she had just moved here and did not have many friends. In just a few years, Angi found a place to live and did many things at the same time. Everyone saw that she was happy with her successes. She had many big plans for the future and believed in a good life in America, but she did not expect that she was wrong. Jared and Angi's lives intersected at the end of 2022. Those who know Jared all realized that he was attracted to Angi from the first meeting. He described her as an energetic and charming girl with whom he wanted to build a romantic relationship. Angi, on the other hand, had similar feelings and took the initiative to approach Jared. She saw in him the ideal future husband and father. Despite the cultural and language barriers, her English was not good. She took the initiative. Surprisingly, just a month after meeting, in October 2022, they announced their marriage. They held a small, private ceremony. At first glance, their story seemed like a dream come true for Angi. She had her own house in a small town, and it seemed that this girl from Nicaragua could build an ideal American family, have children, and develop a career. Jared had everything she needed to help her do that. Jared was the son of a wealthy family, had no money problems. He truly loved Angi. However, behind this perfect appearance, everything was not good. Before getting married, Angi regularly updated her social media profile, posting photos and various posts, but after getting married, the number of posts gradually decreased. She almost stopped taking photos with Jared after the wedding. Relatives began to ask about this change, because it was unlike the active and sociable girl like Angi, but she avoided these questions. Many people suspected that Jared had forbidden her to do those things. Angi just evaded, saying that there was no violence in their relationship, but admitted that her husband had an influence on her, making her emotionally exhausted. This did not surprise anyone. Although Jared's family was considered kind, many locals knew that he had a criminal record. He also had problems with banned substances and alcohol. His parents knew this, but they did not tell Angi because they believed that marriage would have a positive effect on their son and that he would give up his bad habits. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Soon after the wedding, Jared began to behave worse. The community knew Jared was prone to drunkenness, using banned substances, and behaving inappropriately. He was aggressive and often in trouble with the law. His first drunk driving arrest, compounded by threats to the police, brought him to their attention. Many believed he avoided jail only because of his wealthy parents. Some locals hoped Angi could help Jared change after the two got married. After the wedding, they moved into a large guest house on Jared's family land. The parents gave them the long unused guest house, hoping they would be comfortable and independent. However, this plan backfired on Angi, who became isolated instead of finding peace. Jared controlled her communication with her family, completely dominating her life with his family, rules, and habits. Angi, a resilient woman who had overcome many challenges since moving to the United States, viewed this as another obstacle. She had grown up in harsh conditions and worked hard to improve her life, initially arriving in Texas without documents, leading to constant fear of deportation to Nicaragua. Before the wedding, finding and registering for a job was difficult. Angi hoped marriage and legal status would ease her struggles, but Jared quickly exploited this vulnerability, pressuring her into submission. She feared losing everything she had worked for if she divorced him. Before meeting Jared, she had taken on numerous part-time jobs to make ends meet. After the wedding, she continued this relentless work ethic, waking before dawn to work at a local gym and then working at a fast food restaurant until late. Marriage did not bring the ease she had hoped for. She still had to work constantly. However, after the wedding, some jobs became irrelevant. She had to look for new part-time jobs, while Jared remained mostly unemployed. He found occasional work, but rarely stayed longer than a month. The small town likely contributed to his difficulties. Everyone knew of Jared's troubled past, making it hard for him to find steady employment. Some believed he was struggling to find his place, while others saw him as exploiting his parents' wealth. He could be charming when he wanted to be. However, this charm faded after marrying Angi, revealing his impulsiveness, insecurity, and anger. Angi was unaware of Jared's persistent behavioral problems until they became apparent after they were married. Within the first month, things changed. Angi began to withdraw from her friends and loved ones. Co-workers noticed her shift from cheerful to depressed, often seeing her crying in secret. She started wearing long sleeves, even in hot weather, as if hiding something. The situation was further complicated by the language barrier. Jared didn't speak Spanish, and Angi's English was limited. Eventually, her inner circle realized that Jared had become her de facto translator, her only link to the outside world, a role he manipulated for his own benefit. He began to control and dominate her. Even as his banned substance use increased, he would leave home and return late at night. Neighbors began to hear their loud arguments and screaming. In public, Angi acted as if everything was fine. She didn't share her problems, kept working hard, and avoided discussing her family life. Many people suspect she was abused both physically and mentally, but she has never confirmed it. She often showed her forearms without bruises, despite wearing long sleeves. She explained her new preference for modest clothing as a response to her husband's jealousy. He didn't want other men looking at her. In late 2022, 3 months after their marriage, those close to Angi and Jared sensed deep tension. The honeymoon ended quickly. Jared, a strong and unstable young man, became increasingly dominant and showed little concern for Angi. She struggled to talk about her problems due to a language barrier and her husband's strict control. She had no family in the U.S. to rely on. They lived on Jared's family estate, and although Jared's parents could have helped, they did not intervene. Angi's co-workers, who had known her for years, noticed she had changed. She once laughed off Jared's quirks, but later confided to a few friends that he controlled her completely. She still hoped things would improve, but they didn't. She told friends Jared often came home drunk, leading to frequent arguments. Angi began arriving at work, exhausted. She continued to deny domestic violence, yet understood she was in a vulnerable position. Her family was thousands of miles away. She had no car, little support, and her immigration status made her fearful and dependent on Jared. His parents also noticed changes in him. He grew withdrawn, irritable, and aggressive. They felt Angi pushed back against his behavior rather than trying to control him, but still did nothing. Believing the relationship would eventually make Jared more responsible, they think Angi and Jared just need time. Perhaps Jared's parents felt more at ease because Angi and Jared lived nearby, and their quarrels seemed to be nothing more than shouting. No one had seen physical violence. Angi believed Jared's behavior was driven by alcohol and banned substances, which made him paranoid and aggressive. By the end of 2022, Angi told a friend she was determined to help Jared return to normal. Loyal and supportive by nature, she didn't want to give up. But the crisis continued. In early January 2023, she posted a short video on social media. She was drinking coffee alone, listening to music, and appeared happier by herself than with her husband. The post had a brief, reflective caption. Tragically, she had only days left to live. The morning of January 11, 2023, began like any other. For months, she had followed the same routine. Wake up, eat breakfast, get ready for work, and post a photo of her meal online. Later that day, Jared came home drunk. An argument started and ended abruptly. Around 5 p.m., Jared went to his parents' main house and calmly told them he had a problem. He asked them to come to the guest house where he lived with Angi. The moment they stepped inside, they were horrified. Angi's body lay on the living room floor. She had been decapitated. Blood covered the floors, walls, and even the ceiling. A blood-stained kitchen knife lay nearby, shaken but resolute. Jared's parents did not protect him. They immediately called 911. When police arrived at the guest house, they were stunned by the brutality. Even seasoned officers had never seen such a gruesome scene in their quiet town. Jared was present. He neither fled nor denied responsibility. He confessed to killing his wife, speaking with a disturbing lack of emotion. The police believe Jared was in a compromised state, possibly drunk, high, or experiencing mental health issues. Detectives reconstructed the timeline to understand what led to the tragedy, focusing on Jared's actions before he attacked his wife. Angi. Surveillance cameras showed Jared entering several stores around the city. In one, he walked in barefoot and bought a case of beer. The salesman later said he looked strange but not aggressive. Then he went home, where Angi was waiting. Jared claimed Angi was upset with him, and they argued again. He couldn't clearly remember how the violence began. He said her anger was tied to jealousy and job issues, and he believed he had seen an inappropriate text on her phone. However, a review of Angi's phone found no incriminating messages. She had been texting a co-worker about plans for later that day. Regardless, Jared, under the influence of alcohol and banned substance, became enraged. The situation escalated quickly. Jared grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked Angi. She suffered multiple stab and slash wounds. She showed little sign of defensive injuries, suggesting Jared may have attacked without warning. The medical examiner concluded that when the beheading began, Angi was likely already dead or unconscious from blood loss. The attempted dismemberment intensified the brutality of the crime. It wasn't to hide the body. It appeared intended to desecrate the victim. Forensic teams spent a long time collecting evidence throughout the blood-soaked guest house. They found Angi's head on the floor in a nearby room and gathered dozens of evidence, samples. Blood drops and splatters were everywhere. Examiners confirmed that a common kitchen knife was used for both the murder and the decapitation. Detectives were shocked by Jared's demeanor. He showed no remorse when speaking with police. Jared recounted the graphic details without hesitation or emotion. He even tried to minimize his responsibility, claiming Angi had insulted him, an argument untenable. Given the manner of her death, Angi's body was sent for autopsy, and her family in Nicaragua was notified. Tragically, her family could not afford to travel to the United States or repatriate her remains. The local community responded with compassion and organized a fundraiser. Residents were horrified by the cruelty of the crime and questioned whether it could have been prevented. Strikingly, the crime occurred just a short distance from Jared's parents' home, yet they did not intervene. Jared was taken into custody and cooperated with numerous interrogations. He confessed at the scene and later repeated his account in detail at the station. Even while describing the beheading of his 21-year-old wife, he remained calm, with a soft, even voice, treating the killing as if it were routine. He said their relationship had always involved jealousy and control. He claimed there was no love. He believed she wanted legal stability in the country, and he wanted intimacy. When describing the murder, Jared said that in his rage he felt detached, as if someone else were committing the act, suggesting possible mental issues. Investigators, however, concluded the facts pointed to premeditated murder, not mental illness or intoxication. His actions were deliberate. Notably, before going to his parents to tell them Angi was dead, Jared showered, changed clothes, and then went to a store to buy more alcohol. After confessing, Jared was charged with first-degree murder and held on $500,000 bail. He couldn't afford it, and his parents refused to pay. He was admitted to a mental health monitoring unit due to concerns he might try to harm himself, and was placed under closer supervision. His attorney pursued an insanity defense from the start and requested psychiatric evaluations. While Jared awaited trial, multiple assessments of his mental state were conducted. Preliminary hearings were set for early 2024. Prosecutors argued Jared was competent to stand trial, while the defense sought independent evaluations. Throughout 2023, local residents who cared about Angi held vigils, joined by her colleagues and friends, all describing her as a bright, positive person who did not deserve such a fate. Her body was eventually returned to Nicaragua, where her family held the funeral. Meanwhile, Jared's family has cooperated with the police from the beginning. They were shocked by what he had done and were in regular contact with investigators. For a time, they were even considered possible participants in the abuse Angi suffered, but that suspicion was quickly dismissed. It became clear they had noticed warning signs, but did not recognize their seriousness. Hoping marriage would help their son, 4 months after the wedding, Angi was murdered. Neighbors provided valuable information, reporting frequent, heated arguments between the couple. Rumors circulated that the relationship was mutually abusive. A nearby neighbor said he heard their last major argument a few days before the killing. The relationship appeared very toxic. Community members spoke out about the tragedy, noting cultural differences between immigrants and native-born Americans, and warning that rushing into marriage can be an alarming sign. Still, the debate changed little. Despite Jared's confession, the motive for the murder and beheading remained unclear. Many believed substance abuse and untreated mental illness were major factors. This reignited discussions about early detection and intervention for such problems. Jared awaited trial in jail. Prosecutors said they would seek the maximum penalty under Texas law, including the death penalty. The defense leaned heavily on an insanity plea, suggesting Jared had an undiagnosed mental illness. He was described as emotionally unstable, with a long history of banned substance use and likely untreated mental health issues. Prosecutors argued the insanity defense would fail, pointing to Jared's calm demeanor and apparent awareness after the crime as signs of premeditation. They also revealed he had been arrested in November 2022 for drunk driving and released on bail. Citing public safety concerns, they asked to double his $500,000 bail. The judge agreed, and Jared remained in custody following the trial. 23 years old, Jared Dykus was sentenced to 40 years in prison. With eligibility for parole after 20 years, he will be eligible in 2043. Meanwhile, Angi's loved ones in Nicaragua continue to mourn her loss. Thanks to fundraising efforts, her family was able to bring her body home. Her mother gave a Spanish-language interview on a local television channel, tearfully describing Angi as responsible, bright, and devoted to her family. Angi worked tirelessly in the United States and regularly sent money back home. She had dreamed of becoming a nurse. Angi was especially worried about her aunt, who had cancer and lacked access to treatment. Helping her aunt was one of the reasons Angi traveled to the United States. Her story highlights how vulnerable immigration status can make someone. She faced language barriers, struggled to protect herself, and could not fully access support from law enforcement. Jared's actions also devastated his own family. His parents were accused of neglect and indifference, but they insisted they never imagined their son could commit what they call the most brutal crime in Waller County's history. The car had gone off the road and landed in a ditch. At first, it was quiet, but then smoke began to rise. Inside, a woman wasn't moving. Her husband stood outside, simply watching. He didn't call for help. Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959, in Wandsworth, Greater London. On the surface, his background appeared stable, even enviable. His father, Alexander Robertson Webster held a high-ranking position within the Metropolitan Police, serving as a detective chief superintendent in the fraud squad. His mother, Odette Blewett, had once worked as a nurse, but gave up her profession to raise their children behind closed doors. However, the family home was governed by unrelenting discipline and an unsettling set of rules. Alexander ran the household with absolute control. When he used the bathroom, everyone else had to vacate the house. Meals were taken in silence unless he initiated a conversation. Emotional warmth was rare, and affection was nearly absent. Major family decisions, including financial matters, were handled solely by Alexander. From an early age, Malcolm displayed troubling signs. While his twin sister, Caroline, easily made friends, Malcolm struggled to connect, but rather than withdraw quietly, he developed unusual ways of attracting attention. He began pretending to faint, often collapsing at convenient moments to avoid chores or responsibilities. His apparent health issues led to speculative diagnoses, ranging from asthma to epilepsy. Yet, no solid medical explanation was ever confirmed. Doctors prescribed medications based on symptoms, never seeking a definitive cause. As sympathy began to fade, Malcolm escalated his attention, seeking behavior. He became fascinated with fire, setting small blazes in school and earning the nickname Pyro from classmates. Though these incidents never resulted in formal charges, they left other parents uneasy. Children were warned to stay away from him, and isolation became his norm. At home, comparisons with his more sociable sister only deepened his resentment. His parents, hoping to give him a fresh start, enrolled him in a private boys' school. Initially, Malcolm appeared to flourish. He joined the drama club, improved his grades, and reinvented himself. He claimed his family was wealthy and well-connected, but his lies eventually caught up with him, and once again, trust in him eroded. At 15, Malcolm was pulled out of school. He didn't resist. Education no longer interested him. He wanted independence and income. In his early career, he struggled to find work he enjoyed. He drifted from job to job, including garbage collection, fruit picking, and retail. But none of these roles gave him a sense of purpose or satisfaction. At 17, guided by his mother, Malcolm began training as a nurse. Surprisingly, he thrived and began a serious relationship, which ended suddenly due to a terminated pregnancy and the resulting emotional distress. However, Malcolm persevered. When he was 30, Malcolm worked in Tawam Hospital, on the children's ward in Abu Dhabi, UAE. It was here that his criminal tendencies surfaced. Trusted by elderly residents, he volunteered to manage their finances, only to siphon off their savings for personal luxuries, including rounds of drinks and expensive golf equipment. When that scam lost steam, he shifted tactics. He started targeting older, wealthier women. His charm was disarming, and his lies were convincing. Posing as a struggling young man with tales of hardship, he extracted money and gifts with calculated precision. In the late 1980s, within months, 3 children with special needs died under his care. Each suffered sudden cardiac arrests. There were no signs of illness beforehand, no medical warning signs. Though no autopsies were conducted, whispers began circulating among the staff. But in a region where autopsies were culturally discouraged, no investigations followed. Malcolm simply left the country without consequences. Back in the UK, he resumed his life as though nothing had happened. He found work as a nurse and began cultivating his social image once more. At a party, he met a woman named Clare Morris. She was born on December 26, 1961, just 2 years after Malcolm. She grew up in a secure, affluent household and had a younger brother named Peter Morris. Claire was the kind of person who lit up a room, outgoing, confident, and full of energy. She was popular because of her lively personality. One evening, she met Malcolm at a party, and he was immediately drawn to her charm. Claire represented everything he admired: warmth, vitality, and a strong sense of self. The two struck up a conversation and quickly began spending time together. On the surface, their relationship progressed naturally, but beneath the surface, doubts quietly stirred. Claire's mother, Betty Morris, had reservations from the beginning. There was something about Malcolm that didn't sit right with her. Though she couldn't quite articulate it, her instincts whispered caution. Peter, on the other hand, initially welcomed Malcolm into the family, finding him clever and polite, perhaps a bit of a rogue, but nothing more. From Malcolm's perspective, Clare was radiant. His twin sister Caroline described Clare as generous and kind-hearted, someone who brought genuine happiness into her brother's life. Even Odette, Malcolm's emotionally distant mother, spoke positively of her. For once, it seemed Malcolm had found a partner who might steer his life in the right direction. They married on September 3rd, 1993. The ceremony was beautiful. Clare looked radiant, and Malcolm performed his role to perfection. The devoted husband, charming and attentive. Friends and family left the celebration believing they had a bright future ahead of them. Young, in love, and financially stable, everything appeared idyllic. But everything changed just 9 months later. On May 27, 1994, tragedy struck. Malcolm and Clare had been driving along a quiet rural road, with Malcolm at the wheel and Clare beside him. According to his account, a motorcyclist suddenly appeared on the wrong side of the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed to have overcorrected, sending the vehicle into a ditch. Moments later, the car burst into flames. Malcolm escaped. Clare did not. He was taken to hospital and kept under observation for a week. He complained of pain, appeared emotionally broken, and wore a neck brace. But scans and medical tests showed no significant injuries. There were no broken bones, no burns, and no smoke inhalation. His physical condition was inconsistent with the violent wreckage he described. At Clare's funeral, Malcolm appeared inconsolable, barely able to speak. Peter held his hand throughout the ceremony, unaware that the man he was comforting would later spend Clare's life insurance payout, £200,000, an enormous sum, in 1994 on a £30,000 yacht, a new Range Rover, and other lavish expenses. The money vanished quickly. Questions began to surface. Why hadn't Clare managed to escape the car, as Malcolm had investigators confirmed that while the car had veered off the road, the crash hadn't been severe. It wasn't traveling at high speed, and the damage didn't suggest a violent impact. The fire's origin remained unknown. Even more troubling was that when Malcolm phoned for help, he told dispatchers the vehicle was empty. Despite his wife being inside, he never mentioned Clare. Despite these troubling details, no formal charges were ever brought. The case was closed, and Malcolm's life continued undisturbed by suspicion. Behind the scenes, he had already moved on. Soon after Clare's death, Malcolm began a secret affair with Geraldine Oakley, a hospital IT manager. Publicly, he was a grieving widower trying to rebuild his life. Privately, Geraldine began noticing unusual behavior. Malcolm talked about Clare's death in unsettlingly clinical terms, often circling back to whether a second autopsy would be ordered. His cold fascination with the topic disturbed her deeply. Geraldine confided her concerns to a consultant pathologist. She feared there was more to Clare's death than anyone realized. Eventually, unable to reconcile her suspicions with their relationship, Geraldine walked away. Unfazed, Malcolm shifted locations once again. By 1995, he was living in Saudi Arabia. There, he connected with a woman named Brenda Grant over the phone. They eventually met in person a few times, but the friendship ended abruptly when, according to Brenda, Malcolm offered her illegal substances, an offer she firmly declined. After his stay in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm relocated once more, this time crossing hemispheres entirely and settling in New Zealand in the mid-1990s. No longer working as a nurse, he presented himself as a computer specialist. At a dinner party that month, he met Felicity Drum, a bright, outgoing cancer nurse. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and 3 years younger than Malcolm. Her personality was magnetic, polished, lively, and full of warmth. For a man like Malcolm, she was the perfect mark. He played the role to perfection, attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. To Felicity, he seemed sensitive and grounded, Often speaking of life's fragility and how important it was not to waste time, within months, they were inseparable. By January 1997, Malcolm had proposed. They married that April in Auckland, and for their honeymoon, they retreated to the idyllic Bay of Islands. But amid the calm beaches and scenic beauty, a far darker undercurrent began to emerge. Felicity later recounted one disturbing episode from the trip. She drank a cup of tea, prepared by Malcolm, and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep that lasted nearly 36 hours. It wasn't a one-off. In the months that followed, she experienced troubling health issues, double vision, unsteadiness, periods of confusion, and extended bouts of sleep, all suspiciously occurring after eating or drinking something provided by her husband. When she raised her concerns, Malcolm dismissed them as stress-related. Doctors were consulted, but none could pinpoint the cause. Tests showed abnormal liver function, usually associated with substance abuse or medication toxicity, neither of which applied to Felicity, who lived a healthy lifestyle. Still, Malcolm continued preparing all her meals, always at her side, always in control. Their home life soon took on a sinister pattern. Fires began to follow them. One broke out at Felicity's parents' house while the couple was staying there, another at a rental cottage, and a third at a property they were considering purchasing. These accidents left Felicity uneasy, but she brushed them off until Malcolm encouraged her to take out a life insurance policy. She agreed. In 1998, they welcomed a son. From the outside, it looked like a happy family. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and often seen doting on his child, but his affection masked a growing deception. In early 1999, Felicity and Malcolm planned to purchase a home in Auckland. Malcolm repeatedly stalled the payment, claiming the funds from a UK bank transfer hadn't cleared. As the February 12th deadline approached, the pressure mounted. That day, Malcolm and Felicity headed to the bank together. During the drive, Malcolm began complaining about the car's steering. Then, without warning, the vehicle veered across 2 lanes and slammed into a ditch. Felicity grabbed the wheel in panic and found it responsive. Nothing about the car's handling felt off. Malcolm got out of the car and asked her to stay put. However, she disobeyed and got out to call the bank, probably to reschedule their meeting. Just a week after the crash, Malcolm arranged a picnic in a remote area. During the drive, the couple argued, nothing major. Then, in an apparent peace offering, Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. Moments later, Felicity passed out. She awoke hours later in the passenger seat, disoriented and groggy. The car was now deep within a forest. Her phone rang. It was her father, worried after not hearing from her. When Malcolm returned to the car and saw her awake, he looked startled, alarmed even. He climbed into the car, tense, and asked how she had managed to regain consciousness. Felicity didn't know. Her head spun. Her memory was foggy, but one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong. She demanded he take her home immediately. Back at the house, with her senses returning, she started asking questions. Why had they been in the middle of the forest? What had caused her to pass out? Malcolm dodged her inquiries. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and claimed he might be having a heart attack. He rushed off, allegedly heading to the hospital. Hours later, he returned with an astonishing announcement. Doctors had diagnosed him with leukemia, but this was no cry for help. It was a distraction. Felicity's father had already harbored suspicions about his son-in-law. After speaking to the family solicitor, Felicity's father began investigating Malcolm's finances. What he found changed everything. Together, father and daughter searched through Malcolm's belongings and discovered a key to a private mailbox. Inside were damning documents. A bank statement showed that Malcolm had secretly moved 140,000 New Zealand dollars from a joint account into a personal one in Aberdeenshire. Credit card bills revealed he was drowning in debt. Felicity's father took immediate action, securing a court injunction that legally barred Malcolm from the family home. By the time it was served, Malcolm had vanished. He fled New Zealand just as Felicity began to uncover the full scope of the betrayal. Medical tests later confirmed what she had feared. Her body contained dangerously high levels of sedatives, drugs she had never knowingly taken. Once Malcolm was gone, the symptoms vanished as if they'd never existed. The man she had loved, trusted, and married had slowly and methodically poisoned her. Her suspicions, once only instinct, had now hardened into certainty. While searching through their shared email account, Felicity uncovered damning messages to a UK estate agent. Malcolm had been posing as a single father, planning a quiet relocation to Cornwall with their son. He was arranging to move by the end of 1999. He arranged to move out at the end of 1999. Not a word of this was shared with Felicity. Then came a discovery that changed everything. In the boot of the car Malcolm had abandoned, she found a petrol canister. It was the final piece. A horrifying realization dawned. He had intended to replicate the exact circumstances of his first wife, Clare's death. The plan had almost succeeded until her father's well-timed phone call had inadvertently saved her life. Felicity now understood the forest, the unconsciousness, the steering failure, the sedatives. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed script. She managed to confront Malcolm once. Calmly, she told him she knew what he had tried to do. His reply chilled her to the bone. "You would have died happy." That sentence shattered any lingering doubts. Malcolm hadn't just deceived and manipulated her. He had plotted her death with methodical precision. For Felicity, the illusion was destroyed. She now knew she had married a murderer. She went straight to the police. In July 2000, New Zealand authorities issued 4 arrest warrants against Malcolm Webster. The charges were severe, including arson, drugging his wife, and administering substances with intent to cause harm. But Malcolm was already gone, having fled the country before he could face justice. From that point on, he was officially a wanted man. As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged. Felicity had only been aware of one life insurance policy, but Malcolm had secretly forged 8 more, with a combined value nearing 2 million New Zealand dollars. His motivation had always been clear: control, deception, and financial gain, no matter the cost. What he did next was true to form. In 2000, Malcolm slipped back into the United Kingdom. He confessed nothing to his family and resumed life as if nothing had happened. He found work, played the role of a respectable man, and once again sought out wealthy women. In August 2004, he met Simone Banerjee at a hospital. He worked in nurse administration. She managed the surgical theater. The two soon became a couple. By 2006, they were engaged. To Simone, Malcolm was a sensitive soul. He shared stories about his supposed battle with leukemia, disappearing for hours and claiming he'd been undergoing treatment. He told her of his tragic past, including the accidental death of his first wife, Clare. He even claimed certain television scenes, fires, car crashes were too traumatic to watch. Simone believed him. She had no idea he was still legally married to Felicity Drum, or that he was a fugitive in New Zealand, or that he had already tried to murder 2 women. But police hadn't stopped tracking him and found him living openly in Aberdeen under his real name. Simone might never have learned the truth had authorities not contacted her directly, warning her of the grave danger she was in. At first, she refused to believe it, but when she confronted Malcolm, he turned pale, packed a bag, mumbled an apology, and walked out. Malcolm Webster was arrested in July 2007 in Scotland. The investigation, known as Operation Field, became an international effort involving over 1,000 witness interviews across multiple countries. Prosecutors charged him with the murder of Clare Morris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to marry Simone Banerjee under false pretenses to gain access to her estate. As part of the reopened case, Clare's body was exhumed. Forensic analysis revealed that, like Felicity, she had been heavily sedated before her death. This confirmed what many had suspected. Clare hadn't been able to escape the burning car because Malcolm had drugged her, incapacitating her. It was also revealed that Felicity was drugged, even while she was pregnant with their son. The trial would go down in Scottish legal history. It became the longest trial involving a single defendant the country had ever seen. In May 2011, Malcolm Webster was found guilty on all charges. On July 5, 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. Simone later described herself as lucky to be alive. The courtroom testimonies painted a portrait of a man who used trust as a weapon, staging car crashes, setting fires, poisoning those closest to him, and weaving webs of lies for profit. Psychologists diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative, deceitful, and utterly lacking in empathy. Even after his conviction, Malcolm refused to accept responsibility. In December 2013, he applied to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, hoping to have his sentence overturned. The process dragged on, but in February 2016, his request was officially rejected. The High Court saw no grounds for an appeal. After a comprehensive investigation into the events of Malcolm Webster's life, the authorities discovered that he had carried out a series of systematic and calculated crimes, mainly for financial gain, through fraud and murder. The investigation, known as Operation Field, spanned 5 years and involved interviews with more than 1,000 witnesses across several countries, revealing a terrifying pattern of manipulation. Malcolm poisoned his first wife, Clare Morris, with temazepam before staging a car crash in 1994 to collect $200,000 in insurance money, spending lavishly on a yacht and a Range Rover. He continued to poison his second wife, Felicity Drum, even when she was pregnant, and forged 9 insurance policies worth $750,000 while also setting 3 fires at her parents' home, a rented house, and a property he intended to buy. Authorities also discovered that Malcolm had attempted to enter into a sham marriage with Simone Banerjee to gain her wealth, with plans to drown her in a boat accident. He also had other relationships, including with Christina Willis, Anne Hancock, and a 15-year-old girl who ended up having an abortion, all of which he either deceived or exploited financially. In Abu Dhabi, Malcolm was suspected of injecting insulin to kill 3 children in his care, although evidence was lacking due to a culture that discouraged autopsies. He had lied about having cancer as a teenager, foreshadowing a decades-long scam. After his arrest in 2007, a search of Simone's home revealed stolen laptops and unlicensed guns. Malcolm was convicted in 2011 of murder, attempted murder, arson, burglary, fraud, poisoning, and attempted marriage fraud, removed from the nursing register in 2013, and attacked in prison, where he hired a hitman to protect him. These revelations exposed a manipulative psychopath diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder who showed no remorse even after being sentenced to life in prison. Malcolm Webster is currently serving his life sentence at a prison in Lanarkshire, Scotland. In some countries, strict control is a deeply ingrained part of the culture and customs. This can conflict with the values commonly held in Western societies. Even after moving to a new country, some people find it hard to adjust to greater personal freedoms. Holding too tightly to these traditional beliefs can sometimes lead to serious problems. Aziz Yazdanpana was born in Iran on May 29, 1955. Even as a young man, he was known for being strict and tough, yet those close to him also saw his softer side. His stern father instilled in him a deep respect for family, a sense of duty, and a strong sense of responsibility, values that Aziz strived to uphold. He was devoted to his family and longed to have one of his own. In his youth in Iran, he met the love of his life, Nasrin Rahmati, who was born on February 4, 1956. After dating for a while, they married, marking a new chapter in both their lives. Together, they decided to make a radical change and start anew in the United States of America. They successfully immigrated and settled in Grapevine, Texas, a small, pleasant town. Later, Nasrin's sister and her husband joined them in the U.S. There, the family continued to build their lives, raising 2 children. At the time of the events in question, their daughter, Nona Yazdanpana, was 19, and their son, Ali Yazdanpana, was 14. Upon arriving in the U.S., Nasrin became a homemaker, dedicating her time to raising their children and managing the household. This was the traditional family structure common in Iran. Aziz was the breadwinner, focusing on a career in real estate. Initially, they had enough money, but with the addition of new family members, their circumstances changed, and they had to become more frugal. Although Aziz didn't outwardly appear strict and authoritarian, this became apparent to those who knew them well. This dynamic reflected the cultural influence of their upbringing. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical family pursuing the American dream. However, Nasarin couldn't help but notice the greater freedoms afforded to women in America compared to Iran. She desired more independence, but Aziz staunchly opposed it, clinging to traditional gender roles. Beneath the facade of an ideal family, problems began to mount. Soon, Aziz faced a series of setbacks. They had purchased a large family home, and as the children grew, their expenses increased. Furthermore, Aziz's ambitions exceeded their financial means, and he struggled to achieve the level of income he desired. Nasarin offered support, but Aziz grew increasingly discontented. A significant blow came in 1996 when Aziz was convicted of tax evasion and ordered to pay a $30,000 fine. He was also placed on probation for 3 years, further straining the family's already limited resources and threatening the loss of their home. Nasarin wanted to contribute to managing the budget and suggested solutions, such as downsizing to a more affordable house. However, Aziz refused to allow her to make important decisions, seemingly acting in opposition to her suggestions. He believed he could resolve their financial problems on his own and elevate their situation. Nasarin attempted to become more involved in the family's life, including financial matters, and suggested ways she could help, pointing to the common practice of American women earning incomes on par with their husbands. However, Aziz considered even the suggestion an insult. He insisted that his wife remain a housewife, responsible only for the children and household chores. This situation persisted for several years. By 1999, their financial situation had reached another low point, leading them to consider filing for bankruptcy. However, the case was quickly dismissed. As the children grew up, their needs increased, requiring new clothes and school supplies. Aziz began to accuse Nasarin and the children of overspending. Despite their modest lifestyle, his attempts to improve their financial situation continued to fail. The situation worsened in 2007 when Aziz lost his job, depriving the family of their only source of income. Despite everything, Aziz continued to insist that Nasarin not work. However, she could no longer remain idle. She had taken courses and obtained a cosmetology license and wanted to work in a beauty salon, perhaps even starting her own business. This would significantly contribute to the family's budget. Aziz ignored her pleas, clinging to his conservative beliefs. He had never adapted to the American way of life, where women could hold equal positions with men, and refused to consider deviating from his traditional views. Finally, when her husband lost his job and could not find another, Nasarin decided to take matters into her own hands. Disobeying her husband was out of character, but she saw no other way to save her family from financial ruin. She was completely disappointed in him and realized he had no chance of fitting into the American format. Ignoring his prohibitions, Nasarin found a job, managing to work at 2 beauty salons simultaneously. This initially allowed her to somewhat stabilize the situation, but Aziz was going through a terrible emotional period and made rash decisions. He felt he had lost his manhood, not only because he lost his job, but also because he could not support his family. He became jealous of Nasarin's success and, in an attempt to assert his dominance, declared he would refuse to work at all if she continued to work like a man. He repeatedly confessed to family friends that all this had severely damaged his self-esteem. The roles in the family had now completely reversed. Nasarin began working with enthusiasm, hoping her husband's resentment would soon pass and they could build a prosperous future together. But instead of actively seeking income, Aziz ignored the needs of his loved ones. He simply stopped showing any initiative and didn't even look for work. Aziz didn't give up easily, but his pride was deeply wounded by his wife's actions. According to a friend of Nasarin, the tension in the marriage had increased significantly. The owner of the beauty salon where Nasarin worked saw her hard work and the problems the family was struggling with. Even with the strained relationship with her husband, Nasarin still hoped they could save their marriage and overcome their financial difficulties. She often spoke of her dreams in which Aziz would find a job and stop being angry with her. However, friends and neighbors noticed that the atmosphere in the house was becoming increasingly tense. Aziz's attempt to teach her a lesson had backfired. To his surprise, his wife was able to bear the financial burden, providing for him and their 2 children. It was difficult, but she managed. Instead of being happy for her, he harbored resentment and anger, which manifested in cruel ways. She maintained stability for a while. However, once the children grew up, their needs increased again, and their daughter needed money for her education, putting a strain on their finances. Aziz continued to mock her. He was so determined to teach his wife a lesson that he didn't understand the consequences of his actions. Even the children began to get angry with him. Nona and Ali were old enough to see and understand what was happening. However, his strict control did not weaken, so they did not have much freedom. Conflicts in the family home became regular. If earlier, Aziz had provoked them by blaming everyone for their failures, now the others confronted him directly. After 24 years of marriage, Nasarin stopped trying to encourage Aziz. She finally realized that he was not going to participate in solving their problems, but would continue to make them worse. By April 2011, Nasarin had decided to separate from Aziz. She and her children left their spacious family home, choosing a more modest living arrangement to avoid complete financial ruin. They moved from a 2-story house of 280 square meters to a 3-room apartment, providing minimal amenities for their son and daughter. The priority was not comfort or size, but freedom from her husband, who was a burden, and increased tension within the family. They ended up about 3 kilometers from their old residence. Nasarin took out a mortgage on the apartment and planned to continue paying for it herself. Remarkably, even in this situation, she didn't want to cause a scene and simply moved quietly, without unnecessary conflict. Even the neighbors didn't immediately realize what had happened, as it was all done so calmly. They were more struck by the sudden silence, the absence of arguments in the house. Only then did some realize Nasarin and Aziz had separated. Only the closest neighbors knew the truth. Several months passed. Nasarin continued to work and felt a significant sense of relief after leaving her husband. The atmosphere in the family became much calmer and warmer. Despite financial constraints, the burden felt much lighter than when she was living with Aziz. Nasarin spent a lot of time with her family and friends. In her opinion, reconciliation with her husband was completely out of the question. From the outside, Aziz's condition seemed to have improved, but it was just an act. One Friday in March, they were seen together again. This happened a few months after the breakup. That day, Aziz and Nasarin participated in a joint garage sale, but they didn't seem as friendly and happy as before. Many noticed the tension, but Aziz avoided conflict. He tried to appear to be a good person, even attending his children's sports competition. However, Nasarin understood perfectly well that this was just a facade. She had already filed for divorce and was waiting for it to be finalized. Everyone thought that the separation was beneficial for Nasarin. Nasarin continued to work hard, and her daughter, Nona, contributed to the family income. Without her father's oppressive presence, Nona was able to help realize their dream of simplifying their life in the US. Just like her mother, the family began to cope much better. Nona earned her high school diploma and then went to college. With the improved atmosphere at home, she could focus on more than just solving problems. She began to pursue her own ambitions. She wanted to go to the University of California to study law. If she could become a lawyer and start a private practice, it could be the beginning of a better life for her. However, not everyone was so optimistic about the future. Close friends knew that Nona was actually going through a difficult time. Behind the facade of progress and apparent resilience, there was a deep inner struggle. Back in August 2011, she confessed to her best friends that she was dealing with some serious issues that were only getting worse. However, no one could get her to reveal any details. For Aziz, the situation continued to deteriorate. He tried in every way to demonstrate that he was ready to continue the relationship, but Nasarin and the children were indifferent. During their separation, Nasarin only became more convinced that she was moving in the right direction and that life would be easier, more comfortable, alone. All this fueled Aziz's anger. He was still trying to repair the relationship, but deep down, he had long understood that it was impossible. Each meeting with Nasarin, where she shared her successes, only increased his resentment. All this anger accumulated, and it was bound to explode eventually. After a year of shocks, separations, and conflicts, on December 25, 2011, Nasarin decided to throw a festive Christmas party at her house, intended to gather all family members and mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Everyone who knew Nasarin and the children well was invited, except for Aziz. No one wanted him to come and ruin the mood. As he usually did, Nasarin wanted to celebrate with her children, so she invited her sister, Zohra Rahmati, 58, her husband, Mohammad Hossein Zari, 59, and their daughter, Sahra Zari, 22. Unfortunately, Aziz learned about the planned Christmas party. He was furious that he wasn't invited. Despite all the pain and insults he had inflicted on his family, he believed he had a right to attend the event, and he harbored malicious intentions. At the very beginning of the holiday, around 11 a.m., there was a knock at Nasarin's door. When she opened it, she saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. Nasarin immediately recognized him as Aziz. Obviously, no one had invited him. He could ruin the family holiday, and she desperately wanted to prevent that. Aziz behaved very friendly, trying to convince her that he only wanted to surprise the children. After a short discussion, Nasarin reluctantly agreed to let him in. As soon as Aziz entered, the atmosphere became tense. Everyone, even Sarah, felt the unease. No one wanted him there. They hoped he would leave soon after offering his greetings. Sarah was texting her friends. Around 11 a.m., she wrote that Uncle Aziz showed up at a party he wasn't invited to, dressed as Santa Claus, to ruin everything. She sarcastically added that Aziz now wanted to win the Father of the Year award. The text was full of biting remarks, as she knew how much the man had damaged the lives of her aunt and aunt's children. At 11:15, Sahra sent another message. According to her, Aziz had already started to provoke another argument. Then, the girl fell silent forever. At 11:34, a call came into the 911 emergency service. The operator could barely hear a whisper on the other end of the line. The caller was begging for rescue. After a few short phrases, the call was disconnected. No information was provided, but it was clear that something terrible had happened. The operator quickly identified the location from which the call was made, and a police patrol was dispatched to the address to investigate. The officers arrived within 3 minutes, but no one answered the door. Given the alarming circumstances of the call, they decided to force entry. Inside, the officers found a horrifying scene: a festive table laden with food and drink, unopened gifts, and the bodies of 7 people. None had survived. The victims were identified as 55-year-old Nasarin, 56-year-old Aziz, their children, 19-year-old Nona, and 14-year-old Ali. Nasarin's sister, 58-year-old Zohra, her husband, 59-year-old Muhammad, and their daughter, 22-year-old Sarah. The entire family, along with their guests, had been shot. The television was on, and one of the victims was still dressed in pajamas. The children and teenagers had been shot in the head. Muhammad had sustained the most gunshot wounds, including shots to the head, chest, and stomach, suggesting he had tried to escape. Nasarin and Aziz were both shot in the head. The victims' autopsies revealed that everyone except Muhammad had been shot with the same 9mm weapon. Muhammad was found with a 9mm firearm in his hand. A second man, dressed as Santa Claus, Aziz, was also found with a firearm in hand. it remained unclear whether he was the attacker or if he had been trying to defend himself. Aziz and Mohammed were initially considered suspects. To clarify the situation, detectives began tracing the firearms. All evidence was collected and sent for ballistic analysis. The public was shocked by the murders and demanded quick answers from the police. Detectives initially believed that the attacker was among the dead and no longer posed a threat. The first major breakthrough came the day after the tragedy, on December 26, 2011. The 9mm pistol was traced back to a 1996 purchase registered to Aziz. Ballistic analysis confirmed that it was used to kill 5 of the victims. Significant gunpowder residue was found on Aziz's hands, indicating he had fired the weapon extensively. Minimal gunpowder residue was found on Mohammed's hands, suggesting he had not fired a weapon actively. Experts suggested he may have only fired once. The investigation was further aided by interviews with neighbors and a review of surveillance footage in the area. The footage showed that after the man dressed as Santa Claus entered the house, no one left. It appeared that Aziz had tried to cover his tracks. After shooting his relatives, he attempted to frame Mohammed by placing the 9mm pistol in his hand after his death. The weapon had been carefully cleaned and all fingerprints removed. There wasn't even a trace of Mohammed's fingerprints on the gun, which was impossible. Aziz fired 2 shots from a .40 caliber pistol. The first struck Mohammed, and the second he directed into his own head. Long, standing animosity between the family members, coupled with the news that Aziz was unwelcome at the gathering, may have been the final catalyst for his actions. However, the fact that he deliberately came to the house armed suggests that he had planned the crime in advance. This wasn't an act of spontaneous aggression, but seemingly a premeditated, first-degree murder of his entire family. Aziz took great pains to establish a reliable alibi, a fact that initially confused the investigation. Yet, for reasons unknown, he changed his mind and chose to end his life alongside his loved ones. He likely realized the magnitude of his crime and felt he could not live with the consequences. In total, 7 people died in this bloody tragedy. The scale of the devastation shocked not only those familiar with the Aziz family, but the entire local community. Another important piece of evidence is mobile phone data of Sarah. Detectives became interested in messages she had sent to her friends. Only 20 minutes elapsed between the start of the attack and the deaths of 7 people. The exact trigger that prompted Aziz to commit such violence remained unclear. During the investigation, various theories emerged, ranging from the obvious anger Aziz felt towards his wife and family to his potential mental state. Many experts in the field of psychiatry weighed in on the issue. Aziz appeared to be a man sinking into a deep depression, feeling that he was losing control of his life. His wife had filed for divorce a few months before the massacre, and his house was in a deplorable state. He faced foreclosure and had not secured stable, full-time employment leading up to the crime. While law enforcement officers struggled to piece together the puzzle, they uncovered the struggles of 19-year-old Nona. She had begun dating a friend and classmate, a relationship her father disapproved of. A conservative man, deeply rooted in the traditions of his native country, Aziz exerted total control over the lives of all his family members, including his daughter, often to the detriment of her emotional well-being. Nona's friends reported that she often came to school in tears, complaining that her father wouldn't allow her to wear the clothes she liked and regularly confiscated and checked her mobile phone, scrutinizing every message. According to his religious and cultural views, she was not allowed to leave the house until a certain age. Even after Nona reached that age, Aziz forbade her from communicating with anyone, especially boys and men. Nona's disobedience only worsened Aziz's state of mind. When the family still lived together in their old house, he installed surveillance cameras throughout the property, both inside and out. This allowed him to monitor everyone's movements, creating a situation resembling a developing obsession. He jealously guarded her, even sealing the window in her room to prevent her from secretly running away to see her girlfriend. Aziz frantically tried to maintain control, a control he had long since lost. When the disobedience reached a breaking point, everyone abandoned him. The head of the broken family simply decided to kill everyone. Further details of Aziz's relationships were revealed. He had been quite close to his brother-in-law, Muhammad. For a long time, the men shared a warm relationship and even went on trips together. On one occasion, they cheated on their wives, renting hotel rooms and spending the night with escorts. After Nasarin filed for divorce, Aziz blamed everyone but himself, unable to accept his own imperfections. The killer became convinced that Muhammad had revealed his infidelity, poisoning Nasarin against him. From that moment on, the relationship between the men deteriorated significantly, and Aziz considered his brother-in-law a traitor. This explained why Aziz had decided to frame him by placing a weapon in the dead man's hand. Those who knew Nasarin well had heard much about her reasons for separating from Aziz. She cited his failures in upholding his cultural and religious obligations. Instead of providing for everyone, supporting his family, and creating a comfortable home, Aziz seemed to deliberately make their lives difficult, increasing the emotional distance between himself and his wife and children. He transformed their life and everyday existence into a nightmare, pushing them to the verge of complete ruin. Instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, Aziz tried to blame everyone around him. As it turned out, Nasarin's close friends had heard many times that she was afraid of her husband. She had stated this several months before filing for divorce, and after she moved out, the situation only worsened. She tried to avoid contact with him and did not allow him into the house. She prevented him from communicating with the children. Considering him dangerous, she ignored suggestions to report him to the police, hoping he would calm down on his own and not wanting to cause him further trouble. Neighbors had heard that Aziz had been carrying a gun for a long time. He completely ignored the traditions and laws of the country he had moved to. He claimed that he had acquired a firearm to protect his daughter from the unwanted attention of American men. On December 28, 2011, the entire Grapevine, Texas community gathered to honor the victims. This shooting is the deadliest crime ever committed in the city. Nasarin and the children were especially mourned. She was remembered as a devoted mother, an altruistic, generous woman who tried to escape the clutches of a tyrant, but paid for it with her life. The Christmas Day massacre of 2011 left Grapevine, Texas, forever scarred, its festive spirit tainted by an unimaginable act of violence. The loss of Nasarin Rahmati, her children, Nona and Ali, and their relatives Zohre Rahmati, Muhammad Hossein Zari, and Sahra Zari shattered a close-knit community known as the Christmas capital of Texas. Vigils at Parr Park and memorials at Colleyville Heritage High School honored their memory. The tragedy underscored the devastating consequences of unaddressed marital strife, financial ruin, and rigid cultural beliefs clashing with personal freedoms. It serves as a somber reminder to foster understanding and support for those struggling to adapt to new societal norms, lest such pain and loss repeat in silence. On a quiet summer night in Charlotte, North Carolina, a young woman boarded the last train home after finishing her evening shift at a pizza shop. The security camera captured her calm, ordinary movements, checking the route, finding a seat, scrolling through her phone. Minutes later, the same footage would become evidence in one of the most shocking random killings the city had ever seen. Her name was Irina Zarutska, a 23-year-old refugee from Kyiv who had survived war, displacement, and the uncertainty of starting over in a foreign land, only to lose her life on a routine train ride. Irina Zarutska was born on May 22, 2002, in Kyiv, Ukraine, to Anna Zarutska and Stanislav Zarutsky. She grew up with an older sister, Valeria, and a younger brother, Bohdan. The Zarutsky household valued education, honesty, and respect for hard work. Her parents instilled in their children a sense of order and discipline. Schoolwork always came before leisure. Chores were shared, and effort was always rewarded. In high school, Irina discovered her passion for art. She enrolled in a vocational college where she studied painting, restoration, techniques for documenting cultural heritage. At the same time, she repaired clothes, made handmade bags to earn her own money. Her family supported her every step of the way. Her father helped her find an internship with a restorer. Her mother offered constant advice. Her siblings photographed her artwork for her portfolio. Education, financial transparency, and online safety were family priorities. Those years in Kyiv shaped Irina's character: diligent, persistent, detail-oriented, and able to combine creativity with practicality, traits that would later define her life. Dreams. But everything changed in February 2022. When Russia's full-scale invasion began, Kyiv came under heavy fire. Air raid sirens became the soundtrack of daily life. For a time, the family tried to keep some sense of normalcy, cooking, fetching supplies, helping neighbors, but soon, reality consumed them. Stanislav stayed behind to reinforce their apartment, while Anna and the children took shelter in cold, damp basements whenever the alarms sounded. Power outages, lost phone signals, fragments of grim news became their new routine. As missiles struck residential areas and stories of neighbors' deaths spread, the danger was impossible to ignore. Faced with that terrifying reality, the family made an agonizing decision to leave Ukraine. It meant abandoning their home, but survival, especially for the children, had to come first. Anna took charge of finding a safe route. She contacted relatives abroad, researched visa and asylum procedures, and compared options: Poland, Germany, or the Czech Republic. In the end, they chose the United States, where friends had offered to help them resettle. The departure was meticulously planned. Irina packed her art projects, sketchbooks, a few sculpting tools she couldn't part with. Valeria gathered the family's documents and medical records, while Bohdan was allowed to bring a few books and his favorite toys. Stanislav, who decided to remain in Ukraine to protect their home, helped organize everything from afar. Watching his family leave without him was devastating, but he believed it was his duty to stay. Crossing the border marked the beginning of a new life. The family completed the necessary paperwork, underwent interviews, and started the long process of securing refugee status. By summer 2022, Irina and her family arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina. There, they received temporary housing and support from local organizations while awaiting the outcome of their asylum application. Life in America was full of challenges: language barriers, financial struggles, the difficulty of adapting to a new culture. Yet, Irina saw it as a new beginning. She believed that only through hard work and determination could she rebuild her life and find her place in this new world. The Zarutsky family stayed close. After arriving in America, Anna focused on keeping the household stable and helping her children adjust to their new environment. Valeria supported her mother, while Irina took the lead in adapting as quickly as possible, enrolling in English classes, searching for part-time work. Bohdan started school and slowly began picking up the language. Stanislav remained in Ukraine, keeping in touch through video calls, holding on to the hope that one day they would all be reunited. Life in Charlotte, North Carolina, greeted the Zarutsky family with a dose of harsh reality: endless paperwork, strict procedures, the immediate pressure to earn an income. The first months were consumed by legal formalities and the struggle to stay afloat. Irina chose the most practical path, studying and working at the same time. She landed a part-time job at a local pizza shop, taking evening shifts so she could attend English classes during the day. Her public transport became her lifeline. She mapped out commutes carefully, timing transfers and train intervals. At the pizza shop, Irina wore many hats. She took orders, assembled pizzas, packed deliveries, handled the register, kept the workspace spotless. She quickly mastered the point-of-sale system, learned food safety standards, followed storage procedures. Management noticed her precision and reliability. She never missed a shift, always arrived on time, often volunteered for extra hours to support the family. Beyond work, Irina also volunteered at a local senior care facility. Her duties included escorting residents to meals, monitoring medication times, logging requests, and helping them video call relatives. Staff admired her calmness, clear communication. She fit naturally into group activities and helped residents feel comfortable. To improve her English, Irina enrolled in classes at a community college. Her goals were focused: to speak confidently at work and to manage official documents without assistance. She kept a detailed vocabulary journal, recording practical words from everyday life, banking, insurance, traffic rules, appliance instructions. She also practiced pronunciation so phone orders at the shop wouldn't cause misunderstandings. The family operated under a strict financial plan. Irina tracked every expense: rent, transportation, food, phone bills, tuition. She saved a portion of each paycheck, determined to earn her driver's license and fund additional training. Valeria helped translate documents, assist with errands, while Anna managed legal paperwork and appointments. Their 2-year roadmap was clear. First, reach college-level English proficiency. Next, obtain a driver's license and buy a small used car for late-night shifts. Finally, expand Irina's skills through industrial sewing and animal care courses at a local center. Irina also dreamed of interning at a cultural institution in Charlotte if a position became available, something that could reconnect her with her artistic roots. Life in Charlotte settled into a rhythm: classes during the day, work in the evenings, volunteer hours on weekends. Irina carried the structure and discipline from her old life in Kyiv into every task she undertook. She logged her progress, reviewed goals each month, and constantly refined her schedule. It gave her a sense of control, a reminder that even far from home, she was still building something meaningful. On the evening of August 22, 2025, Irina Zarutska clocked in for her usual shift at the pizza shop. Her schedule was set to end by 10 p.m., just in time to catch her train home. Once the shift ended, she followed every closing procedure precisely, cleaned her area, packed the boxes, finalized the inventory log, and signed out of the system. Everything was done by the book. As always, around 9:50 p.m., the shift manager gave her the all-clear to leave. Irina logged out, changed out of her work uniform, and gathered her belongings. Before stepping out, she checked the transit schedule one last time. The next Blue Line train would get her home right on time. The walk to the station was short and familiar. She followed the main road, bright with streetlights and regular traffic signals. Passing a few crosswalks, she soon reached the East-West Boulevard platform. The arrival board showed her train was just minutes away. Everything felt ordinary. A handful of passengers stood scattered along the platform, keeping to the yellow safety lines. Some hovered by the vending machines, others waited quietly near the boarding zones. Irina took her place a few steps back from the edge, pulled out her transit pass, and got ready to board. Overhead announcements echoed through the speakers. Updates on arrivals, safety reminders, standard etiquette notice. The train rolled in right on schedule, brakes hissing as the doors slid open across the platform. Irina waited for the last few people to exit, then stepped inside through the middle door. Careful not to block anyone, she spotted an open aisle seat near the middle of the car and settled in. Her backpack rested neatly at her feet, phone in hand, headphones in place. The transit rules prohibited taking extra space, so she sat upright, keeping everything tidy and contained. The train started smoothly, the hum of motion steady beneath her. Stop announcements came clearly through the intercom. A few riders were spread out across the car. Some scrolled on their phones. Others stared into the windows. Plenty of seats remained open. Irina's seat choice gave her a quick exit at her stop. She glanced at the route map above the door, tracing the stops, just to be sure. Her phone stayed on, notifications active, ready in case her family texted after she got off. Up to that point, everything ran exactly as planned. The shift had ended, her route was confirmed, and the train was on time. According to the internal surveillance footage, the scene appeared calm and uneventful. The ceiling camera captured a wide view, another by the door added coverage from a side angle. Irina sat near the middle, facing forward. Moments later, a man entered and took the window seat one row behind her. Separated by a single seatback, there was no exchange, no glance, no word between them. For the first minute after departure, the carriage stayed quiet. Irina remained still, focused ahead. The man beside the window also appeared motionless, his posture slightly turned toward the wall. No movement was visible in his section. Then, in the next minute, he adjusted. His shoulder rolled forward. He leaned subtly toward the aisle. One hand slipped into his hoodie pocket, paused for several seconds, then withdrew slightly as he glanced around. None of the other passengers seemed to notice. No one reacted. The carriage stayed hushed. At the start of the third minute, his movements changed again. He lifted himself slightly, reaching deeper into his pocket. In the frame, a folding object came into view. A metallic glint. His fingers wrapped around the handle. His thumb slid along the locking mechanism. Irina remained unaware, her focus straight ahead, the space between them unchanged. Nothing in his demeanor gave away what was coming. In the fourth minute, the attack began. He stood abruptly, stepped sideways, and delivered 3 rapid strikes aimed at her neck. The footage shows the motions in quick succession, short, sharp, and without hesitation. There were no words, no warning. Irina tried to stand, but stumbled, losing balance. Around here, passengers recoiled, stepping back in confusion and fear. One person darted toward the front of the car. The attacker turned toward the aisle, moving calmly toward the next section. The weapon disappeared below the camera's frame. Doorway footage showed chaos breaking out. Riders pressing themselves against the poles, 2 sliding to the far seats, 1 fleeing through the intercar passage. No one helped. During those critical moments, everyone was paralyzed by fear. Almost immediately, a passenger from the front rows signals toward the operator's cab. On the footage, he can be seen glancing back, gesturing with his hand, and then moving out of sight behind the partition. Shouts and exclamations are audible in the car. Irina remains in her section. 2 other riders appear nearby, looking around and trying to assess the situation. From the first active movement of the assailant to the train's full stop, roughly 2 minutes pass. During this time, the doors remain closed, and the train continues toward the next platform. All onboard systems, lighting, and announcements function normally. Cameras show that the attacker does not return to his seat or approach Irina again. Instead, he keeps a straight path forward down the aisle. The first calls to emergency services come in almost immediately after the assault. One passenger from the same car reports a woman who has been injured with a knife, lying on the floor and unable to move. The dispatcher asks for details, the train's direction, line name, and nearest station. The caller doesn't know the exact car number, but describes landmarks inside and confirms the train is heading toward East-West Boulevard. That information is relayed instantly to a police patrol and a county medic team in Mecklenburg County. The call is classified as a trauma with bleeding, with a note about a possible armed suspect still on board. The dispatcher instructs the caller on basic first aid and warns them not to move the victim. A second call comes from a neighboring car. An eyewitness reports seeing the attacker walking down the aisle, apparently heading toward the exit at the next stop. His description of the man's appearance and direction helps police prepare to intercept him on the platform. A third call is logged from the platform itself. The caller says he can see a man stepping off the train who matches the description broadcast over the radio. The dispatcher warns him not to approach, only to keep eyes on the suspect's movements. Meanwhile, the dispatcher stayed on the line with a passenger still inside the train car where Irina lay. Her breathing was labored, but she was still showing signs of life. Eyewitnesses tried to follow instructions. One person kept firm pressure on the wound, another monitored her breathing and reported any changes. In the background, the dispatcher could hear the conductor's announcements, the sound of braking, and the doors opening, cues that allowed emergency crews to synchronize their arrival down to the minute. As the train came to a stop, the dispatcher instructed witnesses to meet the medics at the door while maintaining pressure on the injury. He also warned them that police would be detaining the suspect on the platform simultaneously. All calls were logged and time-stamped, later becoming part of the evidence. The train arrived at East-West Boulevard Station. As soon as the doors opened, Charlotte police, already briefed with the suspect's description, moved into position at every exit to prevent escape. A man in dark clothing stepped off the train, matching the description exactly. This was de Carlos de Juan Brown Jr. He did not run. Instead, he walked calmly. Looking around, officers ordered him to stop and raise his hands. Brown complied without resistance. He was quickly handcuffed, and a knife bearing traces of blood was found during the search. After the arrest, he was escorted through a secure passage and handed over to a patrol unit. At that same moment, paramedics entered the train car. Passengers pointed to the young woman lying on the floor. She was unconscious, not breathing. She had sustained 3 knife wounds, 2 to the neck area and 1 to the chest. Witnesses explained they had tried to stop the bleeding by pressing clothing against the wounds, but their efforts had been unsuccessful. The medics immediately began resuscitation measures, applying an oxygen mask and using specialized dressings for several minutes. They tried to restore her heartbeat, but due to severe injury to the neck vessels and massive blood loss, they could not save Irina. She was pronounced dead inside the train car. Following the official pronouncement, police cordoned off the train. The car where Irina Zarutska had been was closed to passengers. As investigators began documenting every detail, forensic technicians photographed the area, collected the knife, and secured her belongings. Witnesses seated nearby were asked to stay for questioning. The atmosphere on the platform was heavy. Shock rippled through the crowd. Some passengers cried quietly. Others stood frozen, unable to grasp what had just unfolded. Officers reassured everyone that the threat was over, urging them to remain calm. Several witnesses later confirmed that the attack came without any warning, leaving the victim no time to react or defend herself. Because the arrest was carried out swiftly and without resistance, law enforcement could fully turn its attention to the investigation. Evidence was carefully gathered at the scene, witness statements were recorded, and precise timestamps were noted. By the time the area was cleared, the first stage of the tragedy had ended. The suspect was in custody, and the incident had formally become a homicide case. Following the medical examiner's confirmation, Irina's body was transported for a full forensic autopsy. Experts verified the police findings. She had suffered 3 stab wounds, 2 of them to the neck, leading to catastrophic blood loss. 1 strike had severed a major artery, making survival impossible even with immediate medical care. Arranging a funeral in the United States proved to be an exhausting ordeal for the Zarutsky family. Her mother and sister, who had already been living in America, shouldered the burden of paperwork and coordination with authorities. Her father, still in Ukraine, could not attend in person. He joined the preparations remotely through video calls. The distance made the pain even harder to bear. He could not say goodbye to his daughter in person, a loss that deepened the family's grief. The funeral took place in Charlotte, North Carolina. Friends and colleagues remembered Irina as gentle, hardworking, full of warmth. At the pizza shop, where she worked part-time, her co-workers spoke of her generosity. She often stayed late, helped others, and never complained. Staff at the senior care facility recalled her patience and empathy toward residents. The service ended with prayers and a moment of silence. Members of the local Ukrainian community stepped forward to help cover burial expenses, turning grief into an act of collective compassion. Irina's story became a painful reminder of how migration and tragedy can intertwine. At the time of his arrest, Brown already had a long history with both law enforcement and mental health institutions. Little is known about his early childhood, but records show he grew up in North Carolina and began encountering the legal system in his teenage years. Court documents indicate that his criminal record started in 2007, when he was still a juvenile. Over the following 7 years, Brown was charged with theft, burglary, armed robbery, and making violent threats. Some cases were dismissed, but his behavior showed little improvement. He drifted between jobs, struggled with stability, and repeatedly returned to crime. In 2014, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for armed robbery. His release in 2020 did not end his troubles. Within months, he appeared again in police reports. In early 2021, Brown was arrested for assaulting his sister and causing injury, followed by charges of property damage and unlawful entry into a restricted area. The following year, in July 2022, he was detained again for disorderly conduct. None of these encounters changed his behavior. By January 2023, his actions had taken a bizarre turn. Brown began making repeated emergency calls from a medical facility, claiming that an artificial material inside his body was controlling his movements. Authorities deemed the issue psychiatric rather than criminal, and advised him to seek medical care. After multiple calls, he was briefly detained for misuse of the emergency line, but released without bond on his own recognizance. Family medical records revealed a diagnosis of schizophrenia, first made in 2014. Brown's mother had repeatedly sought his involuntary hospitalization after a series of violent outbursts at home. Those stays typically lasted around 2 weeks, followed by brief supervision that quickly ended. In later years, he continued to suffer from delusions involving mind control and external manipulation. Because he never participated in consistent outpatient treatment, relapses became inevitable. Between 2014 and 2025, Brown failed to form stable social ties. His mother and sister eventually cut off all contact for their own safety. Cohabitation, impossible. Records suggest he spent long periods without permanent housing, alternating between shelters and short-term stays. Financial independence eluded him. He never maintained steady employment. At the beginning of 2025, during a court hearing for one of his minor offenses, a judge once again released him on his own recognizance. Despite his homelessness and history of repeat crimes, the oversight imposed was minimal. He only needed to appear in court and follow basic restrictions. Without structured supervision, He slipped through every gap the system allowed. Federal prosecutors have now charged Brown with murder committed on public transit, a federal offense that permits the case to be tried at the national level and opens the door to the death penalty. Prosecutors have stated their intention to pursue the maximum sentence allowed by law. The state has also filed its own first-degree murder charge, but federal jurisdiction gives the U.S. Department of Justice direct authority to petition for capital punishment. The investigation determined that Brown and Irina had never met. Case records confirmed the attack was completely random. Irina had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was no evidence of robbery, argument, or any motive suggesting personal gain. Considering Brown's long-documented psychiatric history, investigators believe his actions were likely driven by delusional thinking, noted in prior medical reports. Despite that, the prosecution has classified the incident as intentional homicide, postponing any discussion of Brown's mental state until after a full forensic psychiatric evaluation. For Irina's family and for the public, the lack of a clear motive only deepened the tragedy. The attack appeared to be a pure act of senseless violence. Under federal law, there are only two possible sentences for this charge: life imprisonment or the death penalty. The United States Department of Justice must assess several aggravating factors before seeking capital punishment: the brutality of the act, Brown's history of violent offenses, the randomness of the killing, the victim's death, and the fact that it occurred in a public space. In this case, every one of those elements applies. The defense is expected to argue that Brown suffers from a severe mental disorder, potentially undermining his ability to fully comprehend his actions. Yet prosecutors have already made their stance clear. They intend to pursue the death penalty. This decision positions the case as a potential legal landmark, raising difficult questions about mental illness, justice, and public safety. The murder of Irina Zarutska sparked a nationwide debate about public safety and the state of mental health care in the U.S. Officials in Charlotte faced mounting criticism as the public questioned how a man with a history of violent offenses had been released on bail. City Council member Edwin Peacock, 3, said the tragedy shattered public trust, urging both Charlotte Area Transit System and Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to overhaul security procedures on the Lynx Blue Line. Local leaders, including Mayor V. Lyles, condemned the killing as senseless and heartbreaking, while lawmakers called for stronger safety measures across the city's transit system. In response, Charlotte Area Transit System increased patrols, added ticket checks, and expanded contracts with private security firms. Nationally, the case quickly became political. Conservative commentators accused mainstream media of ignoring the story, and figures like Elon Musk and Donald Trump blamed soft on crime policies for the tragedy. Trump called Irina Zarutska's killer a deranged monster, criticizing local judges and bail reform. His remarks fueled renewed debate over justice reform and the death penalty in North Carolina. The state legislature soon introduced House Bill 307, known as the Irina Law, tightening bail restrictions, mandating GPS monitoring for violent offenders, and reinstating harsher penalties for crimes on public transit. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law in early October 2025. Zarutska's death resonated far beyond North Carolina. Vigils were held in Charlotte and abroad, with Ukrainian officials expressing condolences and President Volodymyr Zelensky honoring her at the United Nations. Artists and activists across the country turned her name into a symbol of loss, injustice, and the urgent call for reform. It was announced that the Rule 24 trial to determine whether Brown would face the death penalty had been postponed until April 2026. On October 22, Brown was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of violence against a railroad company and a public transportation system. A mother of two disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had two very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had two children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed this was to repay the 6,000 British pound she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. The police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The records showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence, but by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before Katie went missing, she got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew £4,000 British, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000 British. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling: sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andrew said he accepted the dare, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to return later. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on GPS data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just 1 or 2, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds this wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty. But just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed.